Grenache class. Jess, did you start recording?
Will you introduce it one more time? I just started.
Sure. Okay, ready? All right. Welcome everyone to the Vina Moda Grenache class. We're so happy to have you all here this evening. Usually my sister is here to help teach the class, but she had something come up that needed her attention. So she's not here, but Nate and I are going to handle it, I think, pretty well. So hopefully we'll be able to tell you all about Grenache and answer any questions that you have. So I see a lot of familiar faces that were at the previous classes. So I don't think that we need to go over, what fermentation is and grapes and all that. If anyone nods, then I will go over it just a little. Okay, nobody's nodding. Okay, jump right in.
Okay. And if anyone has any questions, there is a chat, and I'll be monitoring the chat, and you guys ask there or raise your hand, and then I am going to mute everyone just so that we can hear clearly. But if you have a question or anything, go, unmute yourself or send a message, whatever you feel more comfortable with. So just 1 second, I'm going to mute everyone. Then I got to unmute Nate and Dre. Okay. Oh. Oops.
There we go.
There we go. Okay.
Would help if you can hear me. So, okay. So hopefully everyone has a glass of Grenache around where we can take a look at it. Look at the color and give it some swirls. Grenache is definitely one of the lighter bodied wines. It has thinner skins, and so you don't get as much color extraction from that. And it also, because it has thin skins, it has milder tannins. And so it'll be a lighter bodied wine. It's really great for warmer weather, which is one of the reasons we decided to do the class now. It's about 100 degrees here, so we are sitting inside in air conditioning. We did chill our Grenache just a little bit in the fridge, about 10 minutes, just to kind of make it nice and cool. If everyone can just take a nice whiff of their Grenache, let it roll around in your mouth. A lot of times Grenaches are going to have really particular characteristics, especially if everyone's having a Vina Moda Grenache. We'll get into why some other winemakers and vineyards Grenaches are a little bit different than ours in a little while. But I wrote down some notes that I wouldn't forget what they are. But as you're tasting there, see if any of these ring true for you. It usually has a candied flavor, which can be perceived as sweetness. One of the things that we hear a lot of times in the tasting room when we're pouring it, is people go, oh, it's a sweet wine, and we have to explain the difference between fruit forward and candied qualities versus sweet qualities. It's definitely on the red fruit side. Nate had talked in a previous class about the red fruit and the blue fruit, and so this is definitely always on the red side. So we usually have a lot of strawberry, sometimes there's some raspberry in there. And one of my favorite characteristics is that it usually has a light spiciness to it, like a white pepper. I know Dawn previously had asked, oh, it keeps moving around. Dawn had previously asked, there you are, which wines have some white pepper, and I was like, ooh, Grenache definitely has that quality. And usually there's some delicate earthiness in there too, and that comes from the grape as well as some of the barrel program. And then as it ages, a lot of times it'll have a really supple leather quality. And then the oak program can really speak volumes in Grenache. And that is because it's such a lighter varietal, it really takes on the qualities of the barrel. And so barrel programs are so important. You don't ever want to put your Grenache into a really old barrel or a barrel that's had a wine that was not up to par in it, because it will absorb those qualities. And we'll have Nate talk about our barrel program a little bit more in a while. And then on the mouthfeel, it's usually quite smooth, sometimes velvety mouthfeel. So with the 2018 that I'm tasting now, I definitely feel it in my gums and in my tongue, that velvety quality, but still very smooth as I swallow it. And then, as I mentioned, it has super mild tannins. And then because of those light tannins, the ageability on Grenache is typically a little bit shorter, and because it is a lighter wine. So our wines, we typically recommend on the Grenache, once they're in bottle, you can age them 8 or 9 years. But then since we do use low sulfites, you don't want to decant the older Grenaches. You want to go ahead and open them and drink them. Don't decant them for hours, as some people are wont to do with older wines. But especially with Grenache, you don't want to do that. And then even overnight, a lot of times when we open a Grenache, we make sure to finish it that day. either that or we make sure to gas it. So I don't remember if we talked about gassing before, but we have a sparger can that we sparge all of our wines with at the end of the night at the tasting room. And then if we're going to have a lighter wine open overnight at home, we sparge that. And that's with a nitrogen and argon blend of gas. It's inert and it's heavier than oxygen. So we just put a little squirt in there, enough to coat the top of the wine, and then that keeps the oxygen from oxidizing the wine, and it keeps it from aging it overnight. So I saw that there was something popped up. Was that a question, Jess? Oh.
Mute myself. So Carol and Eric are enjoying a 2014 Grenache, and they were noticing that the color was much darker than people who are enjoying either the 16 or the 17 or the more recent years.
Okay, so that has everything to do with the drought. 2013 and 2014, and then into 2015, but we did start to get some rain in 2015. Those were drought years. And then also we got our grapes in 2013 through 2016, or no, 20, sorry, I wrote this down. 20, or I was talking about which we got from Rorick. So Rorick Heritage Vineyard was 2013 through 2016, and their particular Grenache is much darker. But then that 2013 and 2014, because of the drought, was definitely darker. I'm gonna let Nate actually talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, when the big drought came, the yields were a lot lower, and Grenache is one of them, probably the most vigorous grape that we work with, and so the vigor is in the vine. It grows crazy. It wants to grow canes 10 feet tall. It wants to set 50 clusters of fruit instead of the 8 to 10 clusters that we want. And so being a 14 drought year, it was not nearly as vigorous. So the fruit set was far lower, as well as just the vine health and canopy overall, which made less fruit on the vine, which made more concentration in a darker color.
So hopefully that answers your question well. But then we are going to talk a little bit about how we did work with 3 different vineyards of Grenache. And so depending on the terroir, depending on the hillside, and depending on those exact growing conditions, each one is a little bit different, even though they're still Grenache. So now that we've talked about the Grenache that we're sipping on, I want to go over a little bit of the history, which is where usually Sheila would take over because she is much better at this than I am. Do drought years lead to more quality grapes? So yes and no. In the beginning of the drought, the grape quality and the wine quality is absolutely through the roof. It's awesome. The vines are stressed.
Like the year of 2013.
Yeah,
that was the first, and it was, yeah.
It was, oh yeah, I don't know, we can both talk about it. It was just really great quality. The vines were really stressed and really concentrated, and when we have really rainy years, then we don't get as much concentration in the grapes because it kind of waters them down. So, but after the drought has gone on for several years, then the vines just start to really weaken. Their roots have been digging and digging and digging for water, and then they just reach a point that they reach exhaustion. And so a lot of times they will go ahead and either stop producing at all just to kind of save themselves so that they don't die, or they produce really deficient kind of
mealy,
yeah, it was like gushy grapes. And so we don't want an extensive drought for a really long time, but those first few years are pretty fantastic. Yeah, so that's 2012 was the first technical year of the drought. But 2011 was such a rainy year that 12 was really nice, and then 13 was just phenomenal. 14, the vines.
14 and 15, we noticed a decline in the fruit quality just from the extended drought. And then 16 came, and we finally got water again, and the wines produced beautifully again.
Yeah. And then moving into the rest of the years after that, because at that point, the vines worked so hard to send their roots really deep down that then the vines are super strong. And then even if we do go through another drought, all those vines that survived the recent drought go through another drought, which we're predicted to do, and those vines are going to be even stronger and continue to produce healthy fruit for longer than they did during the prior drought. So hopefully that makes sense. Okay. So now we'll move into the history of Grenache. It's one of the most widely planted varietals in the whole world. And one of the reasons for that is because it's such a great blender. You don't find a lot of straight Grenaches, although you do find them occasionally, but a lot of times they're blended into other grapes. It's primarily grown in 4 regions. Spain, which is where it originated from, and it originated in the northern region of Spain in the Aragon area. And then it wasn't planted in the Rioja region, which is one of the places it's most commonly found now, until after the phylloxera. What would you call that?
Infestation.
Infestation, not a pandemic. The infestation of phylloxera. And one of the reasons after the phylloxera infestation in Europe, they decided to start planting Grenache there is because it is such a strong rootstock and such a vigorous grower, and it really likes heat. So like just super vigorous. And so when they were trying to recover after they lost so many vines to phylloxera infestation, then they were able to plant Grenache and really recover quickly. And then in Spain, it's often blended with Tempranillo. And then the next three, it's primarily blended into GSM. So France, it started out in the southern region of France, in the southern Rhone region, and especially in the Châteauneuf-du-Pape region. So when I was there in France and in that region, pretty much all of the most common wines that you find are GSM blends, so Grenache, Syrah, Mourvedre, but you do find a little bit of each of those on their own. And then Australia was one of the first varietals introduced in Australia, and that was in the early 18th century, and it was its top producer in Australia until Shiraz took over in the 1960s. So all the way from the early 18th century all the way until 1960, Grenache was the #1 grape grown in Australia. And then the United States, it didn't come to the United States until 1860. It was planted first in California, and that is because it does like those hot, dry conditions and is such a vigorous plant that loves the drought and is very drought resistant, and then it has the high yield. So, and then again, typically found in a GSM. So 3 countries where the GSM is most popular, and then in the Rioja region where it's blended with Tempranillo. So hopefully I covered things okay the way Sheila would have. She's usually so much more knowledgeable about the whole history than I am. So hopefully I covered that okay. Does anyone have any questions on the history? Okay, awesome. So we started working with Grenache in 2013. Nate's been making wine for since 1999, and Vina Moda didn't make a straight Grenache and only blended with it a little bit prior to 2013. But his inspiration for that was tasting another winemaker's Grenache, and I will let him talk about that.
Yeah, so our history with Grenache goes back to, what's it?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we'll get to that in a sec, Pat. So yeah, our history of Grenache was tasting wine at a restaurant called Bricks in Napa. I don't know if any of you have been there, and really enjoy that place. One of my faves when I go down there. And I was with my clients, Euclid, Mike Farmer, and Lucas Farmer was actually the bartender behind the bar at the time. And he said, Nate, you got to try this wine. And it was Grenache. And honestly, I tried Grenache in a few other places around Murphy's and stuff, and I just never was a fan of it. It was very light and kind of acidic and not much character to it. And so I was a little reluctant to try the Grenache, but Lucas twisted my arm. I ended up trying this Grenache, and it blew my mind. It was so good. I ended up having 2 or 3 glasses right there at that sitting, and then I couldn't quit thinking about it. So I had to ask him, where does this come from? How do I get to the place? So he wrote me a little map on a bar napkin, and it was at this castle that wasn't the winemaker's castle. He was just renting a little small dungeon out of the place. It was down in this little basement looking thing. And so I went there. I got on a phone call with the guy, and he said, yeah, I'm just getting ready to leave, but if you make it here in 15 minutes, we can have a taste. And so I made it there. I got into the castle, and we sat down. We started tasting wine, and he told me his inspiration and how he picked Grenache and how he never loved Grenache until he found the right vineyard at Grenache and then started making it correctly. Because most people, when they're making Grenache, your Brix levels are only around 23, 24 at the most, and most people make Grenache into a rosé, if anything. So this winemaker and I started to talk, and he said, no, you've got to pick at 27, 28. And it blew my mind for such a small, light grape. But I said, okay, fantastic. And I ended up buying, I think, 4 cases from him right there. And it sucks. I should have bought 20 because it was that good. and they ran out real quick after I got some of the last cases, and then their 2009, 2010, not quite as good. And so the winery, I'll name drop them real quick just for their props, was T-Vine. So T-Vine right out of Calistoga, and they're now in Calistoga. They were in Napa, but absolutely phenomenal. And the 2009, 10, all those vintages were never quite as good. Winemakers ended up changing, and he went to create Pinot. But yeah, that's what hooked me. I came back and I said, if I can't get this Grenache anymore, I'm going to make a Grenache just as good. So I started honing my skills in making Grenache, and one of my favorite varietals to do now.
So our first vintage was in 2013, and when he came back from that trip, he brought the bottle home, or the bottles home, and we shared a bottle, and we just talked about all the characteristics of it, and how truly beautiful it was. And at that point, we hadn't worked with it, and so our first vintage was 2013, and that was from Rorick Heritage Vineyard, which is the old Steveno. At the time, it was called Dragoni, and then the Rorick family came and bought it in 2013. And that was originally planted by Barden Steveno, and Nate was the assistant winemaker at Steveno back when. So that was the last time he had actually worked with it, but not straight with Grenache, because he was the assistant winemaker, and they made a lot of varietals back then. But so we were able to go and see the vineyard and see where it was grown, and see the fruit set on it, and it was just absolutely beautiful. So we started out making Rorick Grenache, and that was in 2013, and then our 14, 15, and 16, also all from Rorick. And then they had upped their production to the point that they decided that they wanted to keep all of the grapes for
They
themselves.
found out how beautiful the fruit was and said, nope, we're keeping it all for ourselves.
Yeah, and
So
they actually
that's
did come in and taste our Grenache, and they were like, oh, that's actually really, really good. And so we were wishing that they hadn't tasted it. We're not sure if that's why or not, but they decided to just keep it all for themselves. And then we started getting the fruit from Villa Vallecito, and Nate makes the wine for Villa Vallecito as well, so we'd already been working with that Grenache since 2010. And it's a little bit lighter. It's very pretty, but not quite as big and tannic, not quite as deep of color. And then now we're working with Dalton fruit, and so we get our Syrah from Dalton as well. And Nate had been wanting that Grenache for a lot of years. And then the vineyard that had been contracted for that fruit decided to give up their contract. And at the time, that was in 2019, we had already decided on all the fruit that we were going to get. Nate said, we're not picking any other fruit. This is the maximum. We're not doing any more than that. And then Deirdre Dalton said, hey, Dre, we have Grenache available. And I had to beg a little bit, but we did get that 2019 Grenache from Dalton, and it's absolutely gorgeous. I'm so excited that we get to work with that again. So I wanted to have Nate talk a little bit about those vineyards and what it is that makes them ideal growing spaces for Grenache.
Yeah, so the Rorick vineyard, as well as Dalton, Rorick even more extreme, is it's grown on one of the steepest hillsides. And Grenache grown down in the valley or in the flats produces a super vigorous, overgrown, cropped grape. And so planted on an extremely steep hillside, the water drainage is far more, so the Grenache is not as vigorous. So it actually holds itself in check. And it also takes less water too than most grapes to grow. It's very drought resistant. And so grown in those locations, whereas Dalton as well as Rorick, it has probably half the fruit set and probably half as big of vines as anything down in the valley or flat growing up in our area as well. So that's what really makes that area prime, as well as it was planted by one of the greats, Steve Collum, and everything has been done perfect to manage that vineyard.
So talking about the vineyards will lead into our harvest practices. So one of the reasons, not one of, there's going to be a long list of reasons, but there's like subcategories of those reasons. One of the reasons that our Grenache is so fantastic, and why when you taste other Grenaches, it may not be the same and may not have the same qualities, is because our harvest practices with the Grenache are very, very rigorous. It's the grape that we have to work on the most. And so we call it the pretty woman. That was actually what I started calling it after working with it for a few years.
That's the nicer term we use.
Yes, it is. Ooh, that's right. So it's one of our later ripening reds, and I looked up to see when during harvest we pull it off. So even though it's a lighter grape with those lighter skins, it takes a little bit longer to ripen because it likes that heat. And so in 2019, it was our 9th pick of 17. In 2018, it was our 9th pick of 18. And in 2017, it was our 12th of 15. So as you can see, it's usually mid to late ripening of all of our varietals that we pick for Vina Moda. And so why we call her Pretty Woman. So Grenache, has everyone seen the movie Pretty Woman? Julia Roberts, Richard Gere. Okay. So after working with Grenache, especially when we hadn't worked with her before and she came in, it took some experimentation to learn her ways, and we started calling her a dirty whore. And so she's filthy. I mean, she's disgusting, honestly. And so she comes in, she has those lighter skins, and so every bug and every bird wants a piece of her. So we're picking out the nastiest bugs. It's just covered in bugs, and we have to pull them all out. They like to lay their eggs in there. Spiders like to lay their eggs in there. The turkeys love to come and just take a bite out of it. So we have to pull all of the bird damage off because it started to rot on there. It started to ferment and then to rot. So we have to pull all of that off.
And then it likes to get mildew as well as bunch rot because it's just so vigorous and so thick. If you don't leaf pull properly and do stuff. So, I mean, it just, when it comes in, you look at it and you say, this is disgusting. I don't want any part of this. We should just throw it all away right now.
Yeah. And then the birds from above want it. And because it has those candied qualities, the birds want to attack it earlier than the rest of the grapes, even though it's not as ripe. So say Barbera is one of our earlier picks. Well, it's acidic and it doesn't have those candied qualities. And so with that Grenache, even when it's not fully ripe, it has those candied qualities. And so the birds and the squirrels and everybody wants a piece, even the fox and things like that want a piece of the Grenache. And then we just find the nastiest stuff in there. And then, like Nate said, the leaves, if they are laying on the grapes, and you don't want to take too many leaves off because since it has such thin skin, then it gets sun damage, and you don't want that either. So you have to leave some leaves, but if they touch and any moisture set between the cluster and the leaf, then you get mold, mildew, bunch rot in there. So it's just all this nasty stuff. And so it takes us usually the longest time, except for perhaps Primitivo at this point, to go ahead and get all of that out of there. And one of the reasons our Grenache is so beautiful is that we take that time. We have to take all of that stuff out of there. And then, but the thing is, Grenache doesn't mean to be a dirty whore. She really does have a good heart, just like Julia Roberts in the movie. She is a very high maintenance grape, absolutely. Just everyone wants a piece of her, and she's so sweet that nobody can resist. But then once we get through that, when we do the crushing, we can't fill the bins all the way to the 100-gallon mark the way we do with the rest of them, because if we take it into the winery and start the fermentation process, Grenache foams.
It's a fiery, like explosive fermentation. So she's very volatile. She's very high ups and downs. There's no happy medium in Grenache.
She flings her mess literally everywhere. And so we go into the winery. If we fill it too high, we go into the winery and she has foamed over. And so then we have to clean her all up. And the foam is brown and looks nasty.
It looks disgusting. You come in, you're just like, I think we screwed it up. I think it rotted. Like there's something wrong.
Yeah, and then a lot of times it has a funky smell. So we have to start out with the normal amount of diammonium phosphate, and then as we're going through the fermentation, we'll have to sometimes add that just to kind of combat her stink. And then she blows off SO2. And so Nate was commenting earlier to make sure that we mentioned that. So the SO2s, we start out with the same ratio for all of the grapes during fermentation and as they start their aging process in barrel. But Grenache just blows through the SO2, and the SO2 is there to protect the Grenache from oxidizing. It's to protect it from rotting during fermentation, but she just blows through it all. And so then we have to monitor her very closely, because if we don't keep the SO2 levels at the right amount, she's very prone to oxidization. So when the oxygen starts getting there, then she starts to turn to VA, and that's the volatile acidity, so it starts to turn into vinegar. And then that also the lower SO2s attract fruit flies, which are just nasty. And so it's just all this nasty stuff. And so then once she's ready to press, we press her, we get ready to put her into the barrel, then when we put the wines into barrel, they still have a little bit of fermentation going on. So we usually put a bung on the top that's called a fermentation bung or Fermi bung. And it has a little
pressure release.
Yeah, pressure release. I mean, a little teething. It's a little pressure release so that if there is still some fermentation happening in the barrel, it doesn't pop the bung and expose the wine to oxygen or fruit flies or floor yeast or anything like that. But Grenache is the only one that can actually pop the Fermi bung, and so we have to go in there every day and check for the Fermi bungs on the Grenache because she just seems to want to be disgusting. And so we have to check on that. And then if we don't put her into an absolutely perfect barrel, she will turn horrid, just nasty. And so we can't put all of the Grenache into all brand new barrels because then
It'll
much.
Be too oaky.
Yeah, it's too oaky. And so you have to be very careful with the barrels. I'm going to actually let Nate talk about that part a little bit.
Yeah, and then so another thing with Grenache is wood. It soaks up wood very easily. So what Dre was talking about, putting into a second use or third use barrel, if it's not perfection, if there's any funk whatsoever, she'll pick it up and take it. So we have to be 100% perfect with our wood program. But when you mix the wood and get it just right, things like the 2016, which a lot of you guys are drinking right now, and I'm having the 18. I think this might be one of my best yet. But and the 17 was gorgeous, but it's just one of those wines that she's so finicky and so touchy. But once she is made right, she is just one of the most, it's like Julia Roberts in the end, like one of the most beautiful, like pure,
kind.
Yeah, just it's a gorgeous, light. I don't know. I used to call it the Pinot of the foothills, but now I make Mourvèdre, which is much more Pinot-esque. But it's just one of our light beauties up here in the foothills.
And so I'm having the 16 and Nate's having the 18. Let's compare the colors. So you can see the difference there. They're just two different years and two different vineyards. So this is Roerick. The last year we got Roerick, and that is actually Villa Vallecito. So usually it's a little bit lighter, but it's a little bit different. So to finish up our talk about the harvest, I wanted to tell you about how many, someone says, Patty, what year do you have? Did you say 20? Oh.
What is it? 2017.
Okay, nice. So I wanted to go over the amount of tons of crush of Grenache and then how many tons are crushed of Grenache in the state of California and then the average bricks. So as Nate said, when he talked to that winemaker at T-Wine about how to actually make a really nice Grenache that's a little bit more medium bodied than just light bodied and acidic, it's interesting to see what the average bricks Grenache is picked at. So in 2019, Vina Moda crushed 2.23 tons from the Dalton Vineyard, and the bricks were at 27.7, and that was 7% of our overall production of a total of 30.295 tons. And then, but in the state of California in 2019, there were 35,135 tons crushed, and the bricks average was 22.9.
So it's not even 23. That's just, that hasn't even changed full variation, full color at that point. So.
And that's out of that many tons, well over 35,000 tons, and the average is 22.9. So we're way on the higher mark for that. And then in 2018, Vina Moda crushed 2.3 tons, so very similar. From Villa Vallecito, the bricks were at 26.6, and again, it was 7% of our overall production of 32.68. But in the state of California, in 2018, there were 40,881.3 tons crushed, and the bricks were 23, so just 0.1 degree higher than 2019. So again, even more, 5,000 more tons crushed, but still only about 23 bricks. So if you think about most Grenache, when you go to taste it or drink it, and it can be super acidic, and in the color, when we were looking at our color earlier, we talked before about looking at the ring of color around the outside of that wine, and that tells you if it's starting to oxidize. And so a lot of times on Grenache, especially those lighter ones, you'll see that brown ring around the outside because it just starts to oxidize a lot faster, and because it was picked so early too, it has less color, and so the brown is a lot more obvious on that.
And so let's talk about that real quick. The sugar levels when picking any grape, not just Grenache, but any grape, usually what we're monitoring in the vineyard when we're looking, my main thing when I go into the vineyard is to look for flavor. So one of the things I'm looking at is the seeds of the grape. So I'll take a grape, I'll bite it, I'll get the seeds out because there's always seeds in wine grapes. And then you spit the seeds. Once you chew the skin up a little bit, you spit the seeds without breaking them, spit them into your hand, and you look at the color. And if there's any green left in the seed itself, it means it's not quite ready. So that's one indicator. But you're looking for flavor, so the mouthfeel, flavor, and then also I'm looking for the color. So another trick you do when you're going to chew up before you spit out, you'll break open the grape, squeeze all of the juice, all of the liquid juice out of it, and then just chew up the skin, and then you spit and you see if you see the color. So it's not super like elegant or anything, but it's an old farming way of doing things. And so, yeah, exactly. So, so what we're doing is we're looking for color, pigments. We're seeing the skin or the color of the seeds. And then the other thing we're looking for is the flavor. But when we're doing our bricks reading, I use what's called a refractometer, and it refracts the light and is able to read the degrees bricks. And the higher the bricks level means the higher the sugars, which also converts to higher alcohol. And then the other two things you're really monitoring in the vineyard is the pH level and the TA, the acid level. And so the higher the sugar level goes, the lower the pH goes. The higher the pH. So the higher the sugar level, the higher the pH, and the lower the acid drops. So early when people are picking at like 23, down lower, you're having a very low pH and a very high acidity. So that in turn can make for very good food wine. What a lot of people consider, and a lot of Spanish wines and stuff, they like them lighter with more acidity, and they call that better food wine. But for Vina Moda and my style, I very much prefer having higher sugar, higher pH, and dropping the acidity down, because we can always add back acid later. We can't take acid away without doing a lot of chemicals and bad stuff, which will strip the wine. We don't ever want to do that. So that's just a little history winemaker geek out real quick. But if anybody has some questions, I can answer any of those for them.
And then, I did want to say what our alcohol levels are. So it does end up with the higher bricks. It does end up with a slightly higher alcohol level, but ours are still not super, super high compared to the rest of ours. So our 2018 that Nate is sitting on is 14.7%. 2017, which many of you are sitting on, is 15.1, which is the highest that we've had in a while. And then 2016, the one that I'm sitting on is 14.5%. So really, that's still not super high for that. And then a lot of times too, to think about when people are picking that Grenache so light and acidic, because they are going to blend it into the GSM, and so they're wanting those higher acids to balance the tannins and things in the Syrah and the Mourvedre. Okay, Jess, what was the question?
We had two questions. So Rayanne is asking, so for higher bricks, and then I wasn't sure if that was just on my computer. Dre, if you could repeat the last bit, the audio is kind of messed up. Okay, so
okay.
I thought it was just mine. That's why I was like, oh, it's fine.
Okay, so and then if you go ahead and, if you mute yourself, then my audio is better. So it probably was because you were not muted. Okay, so I will repeat. So the alcohol levels, does that sound better? Any? No? Yes, okay. So the alcohol levels on our last three vintages, so the 2018 was 14.7%, 2017 was 15.1, and 2016 was 14.5. So even though we did let the bricks get higher, and so that means a little bit higher alcohol, that's still not super high, especially for Vina Moda wines, which are typically between 14 and 15.1 or 2% alcohol. And then also to think about a lot of the winemakers that are picking that Grenache at those lower bricks, they're doing that because they are planning on blending it into a GSM, so Grenache, Syrah, Mourvedre, and so they actually are hoping to have those acids from the Grenache balance out some of the tannins and things from the Syrah.
And another input on why people pick so low is because most winemakers are safe, extremely safe, and they don't want to ever have any issues with not getting a fermentation to go all the way through, and then they're left with a stuck fermentation is what it's called, where you have residual sugar and your wine has sweetness to it. So you never want to end up with a sweet wine when you're not intending to have a sweet wine. But there's a lot of ways to work a wine with higher alcohols like that, to manipulate it, to get it down and get the sugars down and continue with the right lab scientific side of it, so you can keep all your numbers correct. But there's a little bit of manipulation there that has to happen, and most winemakers are too safe to walk that fine line. And at Vina Moda, I walk the line all the time, and I've paid for it a couple times, but I've gotten better. So yeah.
And then too, as we were talking about like how much nasty there is in Grenache, basically every day that you leave it longer on the vineyard, the more of that you're going to have. And so most wineries don't do that. They don't pull all that out. And so if they leave it on the vine, then it's just going to get worse and worse and dirtier and dirtier. So we don't mind that because we pull it all out. We do lose a good amount of it, but it's worth it because she's worth the work to make her an elegant, beautiful, pretty lady. Okay. Now with the question.
Okay, so there was 2 questions. So Rayanne was asking, so for higher bricks, do you keep it on the vine for longer? And then Wendy was wondering, how do you add acidity later?
Okay, so I can answer both of those. So yes, the longer you let it hang on the vine, the higher the sugar levels go. And it'll continue to go higher and higher, and it'll turn into raisin. And at that point, it raisins, and it's just super sweet. So there's the fine line between getting too much raisin in the vineyard, because especially where we live, vineyards are very steep. There's a lot of up and down, a lot of hill level. And so the highest part of the hill, the top of the hill, is going to start to raisin before the bottom. And the bottom is going to be plump and a touch more green quality to it. So you've got to find the balance. If you're picking the whole vineyard at one time, you have to find the balance in between. And the more raisin qualities you get, the more raising that happens, the more raisin qualities you will get in the wine, and you'll get a perceived kind of pruny, raisiny quality to it. So we don't want to go quite that far, but sometimes we have to get the health and the ripening for all the stuff that's down low, that's still green and more herbaceous.
Well, and Nate also, luckily we have wonderful vineyard managers that are willing to work with Nate, but a lot of times Nate will say, okay, I want the top half of the vineyard now, and then I want the bottom half of the vineyard later. And so that sometimes can cause a little bit of frustration on the grower's part, because they just want to have the pickers come out once and do the whole thing. But Nate's like, no, this part's ready, that part's not. And so that's why we sometimes, even though we typically only do 13 varietals, we'll have sometimes 20 or so picks, because we're going to pick one varietal twice, or sometimes even 3 times, depending on which part of the vineyard is ready at any given time. Yes, we do have graduated harvesting. So our harvest is typically anywhere from 10 to 16 weeks. And that's for all the vineyards or all the wineries that we make wine for. So depending on the ripening, we mentioned in a previous class that Villa Vallecito is in that Mediterranean zone. Yeah, so we almost always get their grapes first, and then different areas ripen faster or slower. But if it's on a slope or a hillside, or if it's down low, we do make sure Nate goes out there and walks it, and he'll mark it off and say, this is what I want, this is what I don't want. And then occasionally we have pickers that pick the wrong section, and then we just have to try to deal with that. And then how do we add acid later?
So the way we add acid later, there's 7 main components in acid, or acids in grapes. So there's 7 main components. 2 of the main ways we add for acidity is through citric acid, and then the major one that we use primarily is tartaric acid, and that's just a concentrated powder form. So you'll get the citrus from fruit, as well as a tartaric, and so that's just a dehydrated, concentrated form that we use as a powder form, little granules. And then we have grams per liter conversions that we put that into, so that we can work with and know our exact volume going in.
We very, very rarely do that. We actually order tartaric acid so seldomly that I think one time we were just like, oh shoot, we haven't ordered it in years, and it, you know, doesn't stay fresh forever. But citric acid, we don't necessarily put it in the wine ever, but we do clean with it. It is great for cleaning. So in our cleaning process, as we sanitize things, we use granulated citric acid, and then we do a rinse, then we do a proxycarbonate. Or no, backwards. Right.
We do the proxy
first and then rinse, and then citric, and then rinse, and then that sanitizes our equipment. So we do have citric acid on hand all the time, but not for the grapes or the wine. And then I saw another question pop up, but I didn't see what it was.
So Monica was noticing the color of the 2018 Grenache, and when will that be available?
So it's available this Saturday.
Saturday night.
At our tasting for the wine club. And then whatever is purchased then is all that's going to be available for a while. They aren't necessarily ready. The reason we wanted to go ahead and do that is, well, I'll let Nate talk about it. The 18s he feels are the best wines he's ever made. And so we've never allowed anyone except for our crew to taste an entire lineup in the same evening. So you should talk about that.
Yeah. It was just one of those freak years. It's like 2013 because it was the first year of the big drought after having a lot of water in the 11 and starting into a 12. And so this 18 across the board, every single grape, when I walked the vineyards, it blew my mind, just the first flavors, just to see the richness that was in everything. And so start to finish, when we came to blending trials, I mean, it was almost a winemaker paradise. Every single thing tasted so amazing. We hardly had to do much blending to anything. But then when we did start to do blending, it was just spectacular.
Well, and he actually asked Jess and I, he was like, am I losing it, or is it really that good? And so we had to go through and confirm, no, it really is that good. Because he was just like, how can they all be this magnificent? So we actually checked and double checked, and we did even more blending trials than usual because we really wanted to make sure that we honored what this vintage was. And so that was why we decided to do this tasting on Saturday. And so obviously with the COVID, we had to change. It was going to be a tasting event no matter what, but this way it's just every wine club member that's coming. I think there's mostly couples and a couple of groups of 4 that are coming, and it's just going to be like coming in for a regular tasting where we serve it to you, but it's the 18s, and so you get to taste all of the 18s and purchase them that evening. If there are
the other thing for everybody too is we're doing all of our tastings. For those of you who haven't been able to come up and visit us, we're doing all of our tastings outside now, and we have roped off designated areas, so everybody has their own like 20-foot area. So it's not a party like we used to do. So it's not going to be anybody close to each other. Everybody will be social distance. We're going to have servers coming around. We're going to do very light appetizers, and we're going to start with our 18 rosé, which is again phenomenal. And then work our way all the way to one of our finishers, which I've never made before, but got inspired after we took our wine club to Spain. We're going to finish on Tempranillo. And so, and it's just a monster. It's the
Toro.
It's the Toro, the clone Toro. And it was our last part of our trip in Spain, and it was the one that really just blew us away, our entire group. And when I came back from Spain, I met with Steve Collum, who his favorite region in the entire world is Spain for grapes. And he grilled me on, so what's the best Tempranillo? And we had started and done different regions of Tempranillo throughout. But I said, without any hesitation, I said Toro. And he said, oh my God. And he'd been drinking a little bit, so he was super excited when he's telling me all his stories. But he said, oh my God, you know exactly what's right. He's all, I've got some idiots making this Toro here, so I'm going to cut them off and you get the Toro next. And so he hooked me up with some amazing, amazing grapes. And it was, I mean, I'm a super fan, but it is the biggest thing on our lineup. It's bigger than our Cab. It's bigger than our Petite Syrah. So, yeah, so we've got new Petite Syrah coming, new Cabernet, Tempranillo, Syrah, the new Venus, the new Phoenix, which are the 2 best blends I've ever made. The Venus, both are just spectacular, but the Venus is just, I mean, I can't, during during bottling this year, usually I can't stand to drink wine. I've already been smelling wine and tasting wine for 6 to 8 straight weeks. And the last thing I want to do is drink a glass of wine. I drink a lot of beer. And I couldn't quit drinking Venus, even through filtrations, even though it's bottle shocked and through filtrations and it's all stirred up. It shouldn't be drinkable. My assistant and myself, or my cellar master and myself, we drink Venus every single night. So it's that good. And then we have a Grenache,
Merlot.
the Rosé, Merlot. I think that's it.
I do remember.
It's going to be a great night. So Saturday, and we're doing the tasting in 2 separate parts so that everybody can be socially distanced. So we're going to do our first group of 30, and then that'll be an hour and a half, and then we move them out, and then we move our next group hour and a half, and we'll taste through all the wines again. So it'll be our good night. We get a taste through the wines twice. So, but everybody will be socially distanced. So anybody that has any worries, we're 100% safe and taking this very seriously.
And then too, we only set aside 3 cases of each as we were bottling for this event, for this tasting event. And so that's what we have available right now. It'll be available first to the people that are at the party. But if you wanted to place an order for what we've got in the tasting room, we're happy to go ahead and set those aside for you as well.
But after Saturday, it's buried in the winery and I can't get to it. I'm not going to dig it out. So we have 3 cases of each.
And that's why we knew we were doing this. And so we set aside 3 of each. But other than that, it's all behind everything else. And so they won't be available again for a while. And then I saw a question, is the 18 going to be in the July shipment? So no, not yet. We are going to wait until they're a little bit more ready to go out. And then some of the wines that we'll be tasting on Saturday, some of the 18s, they were in such limited production that they actually won't ever be poured in the tasting room, and they may not even be able to go out in the 3-bottle shipment. So we will share that information of which varietals we have and how many cases we bottled with the wine club, just so that if anyone does want us to set some aside for them, then we can work on doing that for sure. Were there any other questions, Jess?
Okay, there we go. Sorry. Yeah. Pat was asking, he has a generic wine grape question. Can you comment on valley or flatland grapes versus hillside foothill grapes?
Definitely. So primarily in the valley is growing fruits for mass production. So the Gallows, the Franzia, Bronco, Two Buck Chuck, all of that, Ironstone, they're growing for mass production. And the difference in the vineyard for growing mass production versus growing for quality is they use a different type of trellising with the grapes. So instead of in the foothills, primarily what we use, there are some quad trellises, but primarily what we use in the foothills as well as in Napa and Sonoma, Russian River, the more elite, better growing places, they use a vertical trellis, which means that the vine grows straight upwards and then has 2 arms that come out each way. And then you tie those arms off, and then the canes come straight up. So it's coming up in one vertical line from the ground up through the canopy. But in a quad trellis, you have the vine that comes up, and then it branches into 4 arms. So you have 4 arms that come up, 2 on each side, and then the canes come up from there. So you've got 2 extra arms on each vine, which means more vigorous growth. You get more sunlight for one, which is good, but you have 4 arms to hang more fruit. So on a vertical trellis, you can't have your grape clusters ever touching each other. So that's the main thing in growing grapes. Never allow your grapes to touch each other. So if you're thinking on the vine, my hands are 2 clusters of grapes, as long as there's air space through there, that's okay. But the second we're touching, that forms mildew. Anywhere it's touching is going to form a bunch rot and mildew. So you've got to have the airflow. It's extremely important. So on a vertical trellis, you can only grow so many clusters because you're going to have cluster here going down each arm. But as long as they're not touching, you're only going to be able to hang 4 to 5 clusters per arm. And you have 2 arms, that's maybe 10 clusters, 8 to 10 clusters per vine. But on a quad trellis, you have those extra 2 arms that you can grow another additional 4 to 5 per arm. So all of a sudden you're growing 20 to 30 clusters versus our 8 to 10 clusters. And so that's the major difference between the valley. And they have a sandy loam soil as well. So when you're having sandy loam, you have a lot more vigorous and deeper root growth. Where we're at, we have a lot of shale, rock, and clay. So it's harder for our grapes to penetrate as deep and give those yields. But what we're getting up here with the less fruit clusters is a lot more concentration. So the concentration is just so much more rich and concentrated per cluster. The color is deeper, the flavor, everything is better. So, but in the valley, you're growing for quantity, not quality.
I had to make sure to capture Nate's arm and hand movements there. Oh, Wendy, moving on to Phoenix. All right, well, and that moves me actually into the next part. I was going to talk about what else we blend Grenache into. So of those tons that we crush, we don't bottle all of that into Grenache. So in 2018, we bottled the most Grenache that we've ever bottled, which is 92 cases. In 2017 was 79 cases. In 2016 was 77 cases. So even though we're crushing, you know, up to 2.5 tons of Grenache, we're only bottling, you know, less than 80 cases for the most part. And that is because we blended also into Venus, Sierra Rose, Euphoria, sometimes into Syrah and things like that, because it does work as such a great blending grape. It's the friend of everybody except Merlot. So we learned that the hard way. So when we first started working with Merlot in 2015, we had about half a barrel of Merlot and about half a barrel of Grenache, and we didn't have half barrels available. And so we went ahead and we were like, how bad could it be? So we put them together. And then it came around to blending trials.
That was the first year I was ever making Merlot.
Yeah,
or like for Vina Moda. So, and there's certain wines, we look at them as our children. And there's certain wines, some play well with others, some do not. And so most of the grapes play well with each other, but there's certain ones that do not. And Merlot and Grenache are like bitter rival enemies.
When you have one and then the other, it tastes like vomit, literally.
Yeah, it's a train wreck. So
GSM is actually Grenache Syrah Mourvèdre instead of Merlot. Yeah. And so, yeah, Merlot and Grenache do not work well together. But when we found that out, we had already put those two together. And so that barrel actually didn't turn out too bad since they aged together.
It blended into a bunch of other stuff.
Yeah. No, not Merlot. Jeff. Mourvèdre. Grenache Syrah Mourvèdre. You know what you're talking about. So yeah, but Grenache typically will blend into almost every one of our varietals, and so that's why we do end up with just a small amount that we put into straight Grenache bottles, but then it blends so beautifully into so many other wines because it just is such a pretty woman after we work so hard on her. And so, do we have any other questions that popped up?
And then while we're on that subject, one of the last other grapes that do not play well with others that are never once, I mean, I maybe have blended it into something in such a small quantity, but Barbera. Barbera is very much, and it doesn't, most things don't, it doesn't like things to go into it, and it surely does not like to go into anything else. So.
Yeah, just a lone wolf for sure, that Barbera. So we wanted to talk a little bit about food pairings as well. And so Grenache, Nate mentioned, is a lot of times used as such a great food pairing wine because of those little bit higher acids. We like to have our Grenache without such high acids, but we have found some really amazing pairings for Grenache. And so my favorite of all time, and I think probably Nate's too, is duck. I don't cook duck at home, but when we go out to a restaurant for duck, there's something about that slight bit of gaminess, that little bit of duck fat, that is just absolutely spectacular with Grenache. It pairs really well. And then turkey at Thanksgiving. So my parents are both here, and they can attest to the fact that at every Thanksgiving we have brought Grenache to have with Thanksgiving dinner, because it just pairs really, really well. It's so amazing. And then it usually goes well with all the sides as well. And then lamb. There's a difference between sagebrush lamb and lamb that eats grass.
High mountain grass.
High mountain grass versus sagebrush. And so the sagebrush lamb is not what I'm talking about, but we used to go to the lamb jam every year in July, and we would bring Barbera and Grenache because they just both absolutely pair phenomenally well with lamb. And that's any type of lamb. Lamb cooked in more of a Mediterranean style, a Moroccan style, more of a Mexican style. Like, it's also amazing. And then shockingly, spicy Thai food goes really, really well with Grenache. It took us quite a while to figure that out, because a lot of times you can't have wine with spicy Thai food, but it goes phenomenally well with that. And then we are both cow dairy free, but we eat a lot of goat cheese, and Grenache pairs so well with creamy goat cheese. And so I love a really nice salad with greens, some beets, really creamy goat, and then maybe a little bit of pecans with Grenache. So it's absolutely fantastic. Does anyone else have any recommendations of what they like to pair with Grenache? Because I would love to have a little discussion on that real quick, if anybody does. I'll let you think on it for just a second. I went ahead and more Grenache. Woohoo! Yes, that does go well together. I went ahead and printed out the tasting notes for the 2017 and the 2016 Grenache. I figured that's what most people were sipping on. So I'll go ahead and read the tasting notes for you. The 2017 Grenache is from Villa Vallecito Vineyards. It won a gold medal at the 2020 San Francisco Chronicle Wine Competition. That was in January of this year. And this one talks a lot about the wood program. So I was very inspired by the wood program in that. So if you're tasting on the 2017. Okay. She is bathed in the soft glow of light that remains when the day has come to rest and night has not yet woken. In that enchanting moment, shadows cease to exist in the vibrant stillness, and anything at all seems possible. She closes her eyes, and the winds of change gently guide her to a clearing in the woods, where the branches of the trees sway as they reach for her like long-lost lovers, dancing in celebration as they welcome her home. And that 2017, we recommend enjoying now our cellaring up to 9 years. And as I mentioned, we had 79 cases of that produced, and we haven't even released the 2017 yet. So if you haven't tried it yet, not to worry. Jess is hoarding it all, but you can probably talk her into letting you have a bottle or two. And I think we have like 3 cases in the tasting room right now. And then I am sipping on the 2016 Grenache. I hadn't had it in a while. Nate brought some in, I don't know, a couple weeks ago when he went to the vault to pull some wine out, and it's just absolutely gorgeous. I know it's Jess's favorite, and Jess actually inspired me to write these tasting notes. So these are about Grenache, and they're also a little bit about Jess. I hope Jess doesn't mind me saying that. This one was from Rorick, and sorry, the 2017 is from Villa Vallecito. The 2016 is from Rorick Heritage Vineyards in Murphy's, and this one was a best of class and gold at the 2019 California State Fair. And so right after we won best of class in that, I think we sold out of it within a couple of months. But we tasted this at our dinner in February. The Babines were there when we had that. So, okay. She is a light with a fire that burns from within, its flames igniting truths that lie hidden in the radiance of summer's darkest night. And in the morning she will rise with the sun, firmly planted yet dancing in the breeze, her reflection casting shadows on the paths she has chosen to leave behind. And that one you can save up to 10 years. And we produced 77 cases, but it is sold out. We have, I think, 7 cases in the vault, and then Nate will bring those in as he sees fit. But for now, I think we have 1 bottle left, yeah? After we each took one? Okay, yeah. Ooh, pork chops, yes. That would taste amazing with Grenache as well. Thank you for sharing. Awesome. And then, oh, I wrote down too the previous awards. So our 2013 was our first. Bye, Rianne. Good to see you. Thank you for joining us. 2013 was our first year making Grenache, and it won a gold at the state fair, which is super awesome. The 13 is absolutely amazing. And that one reminded me of the People's Queen, Eva Perón. And then the 2014 Grenache, which someone I think earlier said they were sipping on, right? That one was a gold at the San Francisco Chronicle. And then the 15 won a silver, but Nate doesn't acknowledge the silver, so it was that he did a Chronicle of their state fair. One of these days, Grenache is going to win Nate a Golden Bear. That is my prediction. So Golden Bear is best wine of California, and I'm pretty sure. He'll get one way or the other, but I think it's Grenache that's going to take him there. It's just so spectacular. I really love it. So that's the end of my syllabus for this evening. If anyone has any other questions or want to, oh, and I saw someone said bacon wrapped shrimp. Yeah, so pretty much all of that sounds, oh yes, thank you. He's going to win a Golden Bear, I know him for sure.
That's like winning a Super Bowl ring for winemakers. So you can win a Golden Bear, it's like your Super Bowl ring. So someday I'm going to get one.
So the question was, do we make a GSM blend? So for the first time ever, we did make a GSM blend, and that is like a Grenache Syrah Mourvedre, because we have a GSM that's a Grenache Syrah Merlot, and that's our Euphoria. But the GSM blend that we made is our Venus, our 2018 Venus, and that's the one that Nate just couldn't quite get enough of through bottling. So it's pretty spectacular.
And I've been making a Mourvedre as a varietal. Because it's just been so good, but we use it to blend as well, but we used all of it away this year to go into the Venus because it just worked. And we used most of our Syrah as well, so we made a good amount of Venus, but it worked, and it was just, it had to go. It was perfect. It was meant to be. So I can't wait for you guys to try it.
It's equal parts Mourvedre and Syrah, and then a little bit less Grenache, but it's really, really spectacular. Well, and then too, because we skipped 2016 Venus, and I anyway was very, very upset that it didn't come together to make Venus in 2016, but we can't force it, and we have to be true to what Venus is. And so we ended up using what we were going to use to make Venus to make the Euphoria instead of just a straight late harvest Merlot. And so it worked out well too. A lot of people absolutely love the Euphoria, but I was so excited that we came out strong with the 17 Venus, and then the 18 is just, Nate doesn't even drink the 17 anymore because he's so in love with the 18.
17 was the double gold and the second place awarded a best of show for red blends. And I don't drink it because the 18 is just that freaking good.
Better. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't drink it because it's pretty fantastic. You haven't been ruined yet by the 18. Do we have any other questions? Okay, look at us finishing close on time tonight. We kept it rolling. Awesome.
Looking forward to Saturday.
Us too. We're so
too, Patty.
excited. Okay.
It's going to be like old times, but just without the hugging.
I think that since we're on the later seat, sitting there, and maybe you guys, and maybe us even, should just bring sleeping bags.
We thought the same thing. By the time we get done with the second show, we might not be drivable, so we might have sleeping bags.
There's always that possibility. Thank you,
Love
John.
ya. Love you. See you soon.
Oh, hey,
All right.
before everyone goes, can you guys just put your glasses up? I want to take a picture so that
I think we're ready.
I can use it for.
Hang on, I need some more wine first.
I was like, hold on, I need to put some in there too. Okay. Oh, wait for me.
You guys, before we do it, everybody goes, I just wanted to say thank you so much. You guys are what makes Vina Moda what we are. We couldn't do what we do without you guys, and I love to see your faces each week or every few weeks when we do this, and just thank you guys. You're some of my favorite people.
Yeah. Okay, cheers to Vina Moda. 1, 2, 3. Yay! Thank you guys. Awesome. And I'm gonna quit the recording now.